The sun blazed down on Willow Creek as the summer festival reached its fever pitch, laughter and fiddle music tumbling across Main Street in bright, bouncing waves. Stalls lined the thoroughfare, each one adorned with fluttering bunting and home-baked pies. And for a while, it seemed as though the entire town had gathered to celebrate the end of a good harvest. Horses stamped and tossed their manes at hitching posts. Young boys darted in and out with sticks for swords, and even the sour-faced elders seemed softened by the warmth in the air. Nobody could have guessed that beneath that golden afternoon, disaster was already stirring, hidden just beneath the surface. At the very heart of the festival, Sheriff Avery stood tall, overseeing the horse parade. Pride gleamed in his eyes as he watched the local ranchers lead their best stock through the crowd. The greatest applause was reserved for Dusty, the prize brown Mustang owned by the wealthy Holloway family, a creature so fine and strong he seemed to command every gaze. People cheered as Dusty pranced, his chestnut coat shining in the sun, children reaching out just to brush his flank. It was a sight to remember. Then, as if struck by some invisible hand, Dusty let out a sound that was part scream, part whimper. His knees buckled. The crowd froze, time stretched thin. For a heartbeat, not a soul moved. Dusty crumpled to the ground with a force that sent up a cloud of dust and panic. Gasps erupted, and then a shout, "He's been poisoned!" cut through the crowd like a whip. Someone stumbled backward, knocking a lantern from a cart. It crashed to the ground and shattered, flames licking greedily at spilled oil. In seconds, smoke coiled into the air, choking, blinding, sending horses shrieking in terror. People scattered in every direction, grabbing children, tripping over baskets, tumbling into each other with wild, frightened eyes. The music died. The festival transformed from celebration to chaos. Sheriff Avery shouted for order, his voice barely audible over the cries and the crackling fire. Several men rushed to stamp out the flames, but already the scent of burning wood and panic mixed in the hot air. The Holloways dropped to their knees beside Dusty, desperate, shaking, their faces blanched with fear. Nearby, a young girl clung to her father's waist, sobbing. More horses, 3, then 4, began to stagger, legs trembling, eyes wide and glassy. The crowd's fear shifted to raw suspicion. "It's the water!" a ranch hand roared. "Someone's tainted the well." No, it was in the feed," shouted another, face red with anger. "This town's cursed, I swear it." Fists clenched, voices rose, old feuds bubbled up, accusations flying in every direction. Mrs. Evers pointed at the drifter in patched overalls who'd been lingering near the stables. Others started whispering about outsiders, about old grudges, about curses and vengeance and greed. In that boiling, confused moment, the sense of community that had drawn Willow Creek together seemed to shatter like glass. And above it all, Dusty lay gasping for breath, muscles twitching, eyes rolling with terror. His pain was a living thing, raw and loud, echoing down Main Street. The other horses began to thrash, ropes snapping as they fought to get free. The fire leapt to a hay bale. Screams rippled out, and a boy named Tommy was nearly trampled in the crush before his older brother yanked him to safety. A swift wind kicked up, fanning the fire, sending embers tumbling over the wooden sidewalk. The bakery's sign caught, and the sweet scent of cinnamon rolls twisted with the bitter stench of smoke. Horses bolted, one dragging a splintered hitching post behind it. Sheriff Avery grabbed his rifle, firing a shot into the air. "Enough!" he barked, his voice hoarse. "Everybody get back! Clear the street! Get water! Now!" But the panic was too deep, the fear too sharp. Nobody listened. A group of ranchers formed a tight circle, each one convinced his rival was to blame. The Holloways accused the Millers, The millers pointed at the traveling salesman, and the old men on the porch mumbled about signs and omens. The preacher, usually so calm, looked shaken, his hand trembling on the good book. Suddenly, a shrill cry broke through the confusion. A mare had collapsed near the mercantile. Her foal staggered, wheezing. Someone shouted, "It's spreading! It's the plague!" That single word seemed to crack the last bit of composure in Willow Creek. Townsfolk fled for their homes, slamming shutters, dragging buckets of water to their barns, eyes wild with dread. Amid the chaos, a lantern crashed to the ground near the blacksmith's, sending a wave of sparks into the air. A young woman in a faded green coat dove toward the flames, beating at them with her shawl, her face grim and determined. For a split second, the world narrowed to just her. The fire, the smoke, the frightened horses, and the awful sound of Dusty struggling to breathe. The fire was finally smothered, leaving behind scorched boards and a shaken, broken crowd. Smoke drifted up, curling into the afternoon sky like a question mark. The festival lay in ruins, half-burned bunting, trampled pies, and a feeling of dread settling over every face. Dusty shuddered in the dust, and the Holloways wept, helpless. The sense of safety in Willow Creek was gone. In its place was suspicion, fear, and the chilling realization that something unnatural was at work. The outbreak had begun, and before the sun would set again, everyone would wonder who among them might be next. Norah Montgomery watched from the edge of the chaos, her figure half-shadowed beneath the battered brim of her hat. She'd arrived in Willow Creek less than a month ago, quiet and reserved, renting a back room above Mrs. Evers' bakery. Folks called her the city woman behind her back, whispered about her odd habits and the medical books she carried everywhere. But until now, she'd drawn little more than sidelong glances and suspicion. Today, that would change. As the smoke cleared, Norah took in the scene. The heaving bodies of stricken horses, the frantic faces of ranchers, the desperate confusion swirling through Main Street like a dust devil. Her fingers trembled, not with fear but with urgency. She could see in every detail the symptoms of something much darker than a simple sickness. When she saw Dusty's chest still rising and falling, weak but steady, she knew the window for saving him was closing. Suddenly, a new cry cut through the clamor. "Help! Please, someone help!" It was a high, desperate wail, coming from near the old feed store. Norah's eyes snapped to the source. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8, clutching a tiny, trembling pony. The animal's nostrils flared, foam flecking its lips, and its knees buckled just as Dusty's had. The girl's father, red-faced with panic, tried to haul the pony upright, but it was no use. Norah hesitated only a second. She slipped through the crowd, ignoring the stares and muttered warnings that followed her. Someone reached out to grab her sleeve, but she shook him off. "Stay back, please," she said, voice calm but commanding. The crowd fell silent, curiosity mingling with suspicion as she knelt beside the stricken pony. The girl looked up, eyes wide with hope and fear. "I'm Norah," she said, her tone gentle. "I know what to do. May I help your pony?" The father, desperate, nodded. Norah ran her hands over the pony's body, feeling for swelling, checking its gums, her mind racing through possibilities. She uncorked a small vial from her satchel, pouring a few drops onto a rag and holding it beneath the animal's nose. She murmured quiet, steady words, rubbing the pony's flank, working to calm its panicked breathing. The onlookers watched in tense silence. "Don't trust her. She's not from here," someone called out. But nobody moved. Norah's focus was absolute. Within minutes, the pony's breaths began to slow, the shaking easing just enough for the little girl to hug its neck. Norah glanced up, catching the father's grateful, disbelieving stare. "She just saved our Molly. How did you know what to do?" he asked. Norah stood, dusting off her hands. "I've seen this before back east. Something's making the horses sick, and it's spreading fast. You need to keep them away from the well and out of the sun." She looked around at the townsfolk, many still glaring, arms folded tight. "If you trust me, I can help more of them, but you have to let me work." There was a moment, long and taut, where nobody spoke. The girl's mother, tears in her eyes, whispered a shaky "thank you." That was enough. Norah moved to the next collapsed animal, her confidence growing with each step, even as resentment simmered around her. Not everyone was impressed. Mrs. Evers, arms crossed and eyes narrowed, hissed, "We don't need no strangers stirring up trouble. You let her near your animals. You'll regret it. Mark my words." But just then, Nathaniel Reed broke through the crowd. He was a tall, weathered man with calloused hands and the kind of tired, wary eyes that came from too many hard years. Nathaniel had always kept mostly to himself, running a modest ranch on the outskirts, never quite fitting in with the town's gossipy core. He knelt beside Dusty, brushing the dust from the horse's neck, and looked up at Norah. "My stables are in trouble," he said, voice low enough only she could hear. "3 of my best mares started showing the same symptoms this morning. If what you're saying is true, I need your help." Norah nodded, a surge of relief and gratitude flickering in her chest. "I'll come. But you should know, folks may not like it. They're looking for someone to blame." Nathaniel gave a bitter half-smile. "They always are." He offered her a ride in his battered wagon, and together they hurried toward his ranch, past homes with windows shuttered tight against fear. Behind them, the tension in town thickened, whispers swirling like gnats. Was it the new woman? Had she brought the sickness with her? As the wagon rattled out of town, Norah glanced back. She caught the gaze of the little girl she'd helped, Emma, still kneeling beside her recovering pony. Their eyes met, an unspoken bond forming in that moment of shared crisis. By the time they reached Nathaniel's ranch, the sun was dipping low, painting the fields in gold and shadow. Norah jumped down and hurried to the stables, where the smell of fear and sickness hung heavy in the air. Inside, 3 mares stood, shaking and sweating, eyes wild with the same fever she'd seen before. Norah rolled up her sleeves, giving Nathaniel firm instructions to boil water, fetch clean rags, and keep the sick animals separated. She worked through the night, drawing on every bit of knowledge from her past life in Boston, her lost career, the years she'd spent fighting for respect in rooms full of doubters. Her hands moved swiftly, expertly, masking the tremor she felt deep inside. What if she failed again? Back in town, word spread fast. Some folks, like Emma's family, spoke of Norah's skill and kindness. Others twisted the tale, casting her as a meddling outsider with dangerous secrets. But in Nathaniel's stables, away from the noise and blame, Norah was simply herself, a healer, a fighter, a woman determined not to let the past, or the fear of strangers, win. And so, as midnight drew near, Willow Creek teetered between suspicion and hope, between panic and the first fragile hints of trust. Out on the dark prairie, the fate of Dusty, Nathaniel's ranch, and the entire town hung in the balance, resting on the steady hands and stubborn heart of a woman nobody truly knew. The first pale light of dawn crept across the horizon, painting the fields and the fences of Nathaniel Reed's ranch with a thin silver wash. Roosters crowed in the distance, but inside the stable the world was hushed, broken only by the low, ragged breathing of sick horses and the occasional clink of a bucket. Norah Montgomery worked steadily, her coat spattered with dirt and sweat, hair escaping from beneath her hat. She checked the fevered mares, eyes flicking from nostrils to gums to glassy eyes, her brow furrowed with worry and determination. Dusty, the prized Mustang, lay sprawled in a bed of straw, his breath shallow but even. Norah crouched beside him, running a gentle hand down his side, whispering quiet words. Nathaniel stood nearby, watching with a tight jaw and arms folded across his chest. He'd fetched water and blankets, done everything Norah asked, but he couldn't hide the dread twisting in his gut. Every so often, he'd glance out the barn window toward town, as if expecting an angry mob to come trudging up the dusty road at any moment. Hours passed. Norah rarely paused, her mind racing through everything she'd learned back in Boston, how quickly fear could spread, how little it took for people to turn against one another. As she prepared a poultice, a small voice interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Norah, do you need any help?" She looked up to see Emma, the same girl whose pony she'd saved the day before, standing in the doorway, clutching a bundle of fresh linens. Her dress was wrinkled, hair tangled, eyes huge with concern and sleeplessness. Norah managed a tired smile. "You're up early, Emma," Norah said softly, motioning for the girl to come inside. "You should be with your folks." Emma shook her head. "Ma said I could help, as long as I stayed out of the way. She's making you breakfast." Emma hesitated, twisting her hands. "I just wanted to see if Molly was going to be okay. And Dusty, too." Norah gently set the poultice aside, then beckoned Emma closer. "Your pony is a tough little thing. With some rest and care, she'll pull through. As for Dusty, he's still fighting. That's all any of us can do right now." Emma knelt beside Norah, eyes fixed on Dusty's labored breathing. For a moment, the stable felt almost peaceful, the early morning light filtering through the cracks, the steady rhythm of care and hope threading its way through the shadows. Norah showed Emma how to wipe Dusty's muzzle with a damp cloth, explaining why it was important to keep him cool. The girl listened with fierce concentration, eager to help, eager for anything that might save the creatures she loved. Nathaniel leaned against the wall, exhaustion etched deep into the lines of his face. He watched Norah and Emma, a strange warmth curling beneath his worry. It was the first time in a long while that the ranch felt less lonely, less weighed down by bad luck and bad memories. As the morning sun climbed higher, Norah finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. Emma's gentle presence brought a softening to her hard edges, a reminder of the good that could slip in even during the worst times. After checking on the sick mares, Norah stepped outside, filling her lungs with crisp air. The prairie stretched out before her, endless and bright, a stark contrast to the tension still simmering in town. Inside the ranch house, Emma's mother set out a plate of eggs and bread for Norah. The adults ate in near silence, but the hush was not unfriendly. When Emma's father finally spoke, his voice was gruff but sincere. "Folks in town are talking," he muttered. "Some say you brought the sickness. Others say you're the only one keeping us from losing every animal we got." Norah sipped her coffee, eyes steady. "Fear makes people foolish, Mr. Sawyer. But I won't give up on your horses or your town, not if there's still hope." The words seemed to linger in the air, mingling with the smells of breakfast and wood smoke. Nathaniel cleared his throat, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little. "What about your past?" he asked quietly, careful not to push. "You seem to know a lot more than most." Norah's gaze drifted to the window, watching the wind stir dust across the yard. Memories flickered in her mind. Years of medical study, the closed faces of Boston's medical boards, the scandal she'd left behind, the accusations that had chased her all the way west. She swallowed hard. "I was a veterinarian in Boston," she said finally. "Worked hard to earn respect. Made a mistake. Trusted the wrong people. I came here to start fresh." Her voice trailed off, the pain evident even as she tried to hide it. "But I don't run from trouble. Not anymore." Emma listened quietly, taking in every word, her admiration for Norah growing with each passing second. She slid her small hand into Norah's, offering silent comfort. Norah squeezed it gently. Outside, a wagon rattled by on the road to town. The driver cast a suspicious glance toward the ranch, then hurried on. Norah noticed, and the old anxiety twinged in her gut. But she forced herself to stand tall, to meet suspicion with quiet strength. The hours stretched on, filled with the steady work of healing, checking temperatures, coaxing sick animals to drink, watching for signs of improvement. Emma shadowed Norah, fetching supplies, asking questions, learning the rhythms of medicine and patience. By noon, Dusty's breathing grew stronger, his eyes less wild. Emma cheered, throwing her arms around Norah in a spontaneous hug. "You did it! He's getting better!" Norah smiled, exhaustion threatening to pull her under. "We did it, Emma. And he's not out of the woods yet, so we keep going." As dusk approached, Norah and Emma sat on the porch steps, feet swinging above the dirt. The prairie was peaceful, the worst of the night's terror replaced by the slow, fragile promise of healing. Nathaniel joined them, handing out mugs of sweet tea, the simple comfort a balm to their nerves. But even in the calm, unease lingered. Norah knew suspicion still simmered in town. She saw it in the glances from passing neighbors, heard it in the low voices at the feed store when she went for supplies. She also saw the small changes, thankful nods from those she'd helped, fresh bread left on the porch, a jar of preserves from Emma's grandmother. Tiny acts of gratitude, softening hearts, shifting the tide. That night, as Norah prepared for another sleepless watch in the stable, Emma crept out with a blanket and a lantern. She settled beside Norah, unwilling to leave her new friend alone in the dark. They talked softly, voices blending with the gentle sounds of the horses' breathing. "Are you scared?" Emma asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Norah was silent for a long moment. "Sometimes. But when I'm scared, I remember why I came here. To help, even if people don't understand." Emma nodded, snuggling closer. "I'm glad you're here." Norah closed her eyes, letting the peace of that moment settle deep in her bones. In the hush of the prairie night, with trust beginning to sprout like green shoots after rain, Norah realized that hope had found its way into Willow Creek. One quiet act of healing at a time. Morning sunlight poured through the gaps in the barn's old planks, striping the hay with golden ribbons. Norah awoke on a blanket beside Dusty, her neck stiff, muscles aching from the long night. But for the first time since the festival, she felt something close to relief. Dusty's breathing had settled, his head rising to greet the day with tired but curious eyes. Nearby, Emma stirred under her own blanket, hair mussed, cheeks rosy with sleep. Norah sat up, stretching her sore shoulders, and smiled as Emma yawned. "Looks like we survived another night, partner," she said, handing Emma a tin mug filled with warm water. "How's Molly doing?" Emma beamed, eyes shining. "She's up and walking. Mom said she even nibbled on some oats this morning." She set the mug down and hurried to check on Dusty, kneeling to brush his tangled mane. Norah watched the girl's gentle touch and saw not only compassion, but curiosity, a spark that reminded her of her own childhood, before everything in Boston had gone so wrong. Nathaniel entered, boots clunking on the boards, a tray of bread and jam balanced in his hands. "Got breakfast," he announced, trying for cheer but not quite masking the worry that lingered behind his eyes. Norah accepted a slice with a grateful nod, then looked up as Nathaniel hesitated at the stall door. "Word spreading about what you did," he said quietly. "Some folks are starting to wonder if maybe you're not the cause of all this after all." He set the tray down and leaned against a support beam, eyes meeting Norah's. "You've given us hope, Norah. That's more than we've had in a long time." The words warmed her, but Norah could still sense the fear that hung over the ranch, thick as morning fog. She knew trust was fragile. A single rumor, a single setback, could shatter it all. Still, she pressed forward, determined not to let suspicion undo the healing that had just begun. After breakfast, Norah invited Emma to help her mix remedies in the little workroom behind the stable. She showed the girl how to grind willow bark, measure herbs, and check each animal for fever. Emma absorbed every instruction, her eyes lighting up with each new discovery. The two worked side by side for hours, their quiet laughter and whispered stories weaving a bond that felt natural, inevitable. Sometimes Norah would catch Nathaniel watching them from the doorway, a look in his eyes that she couldn't quite read. He lingered close, helping where he could, careful to keep his distance but always nearby when Norah needed another pair of hands. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, he found Norah patching up a mare's injured leg. "You're good with them," he said softly, his gaze steady. "Better than anyone I've seen. I don't know what Boston lost, but I'm glad Willow Creek found you." Norah felt her cheeks flush, a wave of old sadness rising. Boston hadn't just lost her. They'd driven her out. But here on this battered ranch in a nowhere town, she'd begun to find pieces of herself she thought were lost forever. She met Nathaniel's eyes, offering a shy, grateful smile. "Thank you, Nathaniel. I've always believed every animal deserves a fighting chance. Sometimes it's the only thing that makes sense." The days settled into a fragile routine. Norah, Emma, and Nathaniel nursed Dusty and the other sick horses, each small victory celebrated with quiet smiles and mugs of strong coffee. As Dusty's foal, barely a few months old, began to recover, hope trickled into the barn like sunlight through a cracked window. Emma named the foal Lucky, insisting it was Norah's medicine and good magic that saved him. Emma followed Norah everywhere, eager to learn more. She practiced tying bandages, checked pulses, and whispered soothing words to nervous colts. Norah, in turn, shared little tricks and stories from her Boston days, her voice growing more relaxed, her laughter coming easier with each passing hour. It was the first time in years she'd allowed herself to trust anyone, let alone a whole family. Nathaniel, too, started to lower his guard. One evening, as they finished mucking out the stalls, he sat beside Norah on the porch steps, boots caked in mud. He stared out at the quiet prairie, searching for words. "I lost my wife 2 winters back," he began, voice rough. "She was the one who knew how to fix things. He stopped, jaw tight, then forced himself to continue. "I'm not much good with people, Norah, but I want to thank you. For Emma. For all of it." Norah reached out, squeezing his hand. "You're better than you think, Nathaniel. Emma's proof of that. She's strong and kind. She gets that from somewhere." The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with the soft sounds of horses settling in for the night. For the first time, Norah felt less like an outsider, more like she belonged to something, even if only for a fleeting moment. Of course, the world outside the ranch hadn't forgotten its fears. When Norah and Emma rode into town for supplies, They were met with wary stares and hurried whispers. A few folks offered stiff nods, but others crossed to the far side of the street. Still, Norah noticed small changes. Fresh bread left at the gate, a pair of warm mittens for Emma, a thank you scrawled on butcher paper. Tiny acts of acceptance, each one chipping away at old suspicions. One afternoon, while tending to Dusty, Norah caught Emma watching her, a frown creasing the girl's brow. "What is it?" Norah asked gently. Emma hesitated, then whispered, "Do you ever wish you hadn't come here?" Norah paused, heart heavy with memories of crowded Boston streets, sharp words, and loneliness. She looked at Emma and shook her head. "No, not anymore. I think maybe I was meant to be here with you, with all of you." Emma smiled, relief flooding her face. She threw her arms around Norah, squeezing tight. For a moment, everything else, rumors, fear, even the shadow of the plague, faded away. As the sun set over Willow Creek, painting the sky in streaks of purple and gold, Norah stood on the porch beside Nathaniel and Emma. They watched the horses graze, the foal frolicking at Dusty's side. Hope, fragile and new, flickered in their hearts. Trust had begun to grow, not just in the barn, but in the people whose lives Norah had touched. She knew it could be broken in an instant, but for now, in that golden evening light, it felt real. It felt enough. Just as the calm seemed to settle, a chill crept back into Willow Creek, curling around the ranch and making Norah uneasy. It started with small things. A missing bucket here, a gate left open there. Horses skittish for no reason. Nathaniel brushed it off as bad luck, but Norah felt the old itch at the back of her mind, the one that had warned her in Boston when something wasn't right. The nights grew colder, the moon thin and sharp over the prairie. Norah worked longer hours, teaching Emma how to check water for contamination, always double-checking every step. They still received kindness, fresh eggs from a neighbor, a hand-carved toy for Lucky the foal, but there were also cold shoulders and sidelong glares in town. Whispers seemed to follow Norah and Emma down every lane. The new trust was delicate, easily bruised by a single bad rumor. One evening, as a crimson dusk settled over the land, Norah went out to check on the horses one last time before turning in. The animals seemed agitated, circling restlessly. Norah's brow furrowed. Dusty, who had been improving, stood at the back of the paddock, sides heaving, foam at his lips. Norah hurried to him, her heart hammering. Emma came running from the house, her face pale. "Molly's sick again. She can't stand up. She keeps falling." Nathaniel rushed in from the barn, eyes wide with worry. Together they found 2 more horses trembling, muscles twitching beneath their skin. Norah dropped to her knees beside the water trough, dipping her fingers in and sniffing the surface. An acrid, bitter scent hit her nose, sharper than any medicine or cleaning solution she'd used. Her heart sank. "It's been tampered with," Norah whispered, knuckles white around the rim of the trough. "Someone put something in the water." Nathaniel knelt beside her, anger darkening his face. "Who would do this? Why?" Norah shook her head, jaw clenched. "Someone wants us to fail, to drive us out. It wasn't an accident." Inside the barn, Emma sobbed quietly, stroking Molly's muzzle. Norah felt her resolve harden. She helped Emma make the pony comfortable, then gathered the family on the porch. Voices hushed as the prairie wind rose. Nathaniel's fists balled with frustration. "I should have known," he muttered. "There's folks who'd rather see this ranch burn than let you help." Norah touched his arm, her voice low. "We need proof. Otherwise, all they'll see is a stranger's word against their own fears." Determined, Norah returned to the paddock with a lantern, searching for clues. The ground was soft from a recent rain, and under the fence she spotted a patch of disturbed earth. Kneeling, she found a strip of rough, dark cloth caught on a splintered rail, a fragment torn from someone's coat. Next to it, muddy footprints led away toward the trees. Norah followed, Emma trailing close behind, the lantern's circle of light shrinking in the night. They stopped at the edge of the woods, breathless and wary. Emma pointed. "Look! There, by the old mine!" Norah squinted, spotting another footprint pressed deep into the mud, twice as large as Emma's. The tracks disappeared into the thicket. Norah bit her lip, worry gnawing at her. Whoever had poisoned the trough had planned their escape. Back at the house, Nathaniel examined the cloth, frowning. "Could be any ranch hands. But I know this color. It's from Hart's place. Silas Hart's boys all wear these coats for branding cattle." Norah's pulse quickened. Silas Hart was a powerful rival, a man with more money and friends in town than Nathaniel could ever hope for. For months, Silas had tried to buy out Nathaniel's land, making threats in broad daylight. Now it seemed he was escalating his tactics. Morning brought no peace. Word spread like wildfire. By noon, a group of townsfolk, led by a thick-set man in a battered hat, arrived at Nathaniel's gate, faces grim, voices rising. "We know what's going on here," one shouted. "Animals keep getting sick wherever you go, Miss Montgomery. Funny how it always happens around you." Norah stepped forward, keeping her voice calm. "Someone poisoned our water trough. We have proof, a piece of coat, footprints," the man sneered. "Or maybe you planted it yourself, trying to throw us off the trail." Emma, face red with anger and fear, spoke up. "That's not true. Miss Norah would never hurt our animals. She saved them." An old woman near the back shook her head. "How do we know she isn't bringing the plague herself?" Nathaniel tried to speak, but the crowd drowned him out with accusations. "She's the one with all the medicines. She's the only one who touches the horses." Norah's hands trembled, but she forced herself to meet their eyes. "If you want to search the ranch, go ahead. But you'll find no poison here. Only sick animals and a family doing their best." Tempers flared. A man shoved Nathaniel, muttering, "You'd trust an outsider over your own?" Another woman pulled Emma aside, whispering, "You stay away from her, you hear?" Emma jerked away, stepping in front of Norah. Her small voice was fierce. "She's my friend. She's the only reason Molly's alive." The tension threatened to spill into violence until Sheriff Avery himself rode up, his horse lathered from a hard gallop. "Enough! We settle this at a meeting tonight," he barked. "Everyone, town hall, bring your evidence, bring your witnesses." That evening, under the harsh light of the town hall lamps, Norah faced the angry townsfolk. She held out the cloth and described the footprints, but many remained unconvinced. Silas Hart himself stood at the back, arms folded, his smirk hidden by shadow. Rumors flew, tempers rose, and the sense of suspicion threatened to engulf the fragile trust Norah had built. Emma, trembling but determined, climbed onto a bench. "Please listen. You're all scared. But Miss Norah is not the enemy. She cares about this town more than anyone. She saved our horses. If you make her leave, more animals will die. So will hope." For a moment, silence held the room. Then voices rose again, some in Norah's defense, most still filled with doubt. The meeting broke up in confusion. Sheriff Avery promised to investigate, but Norah knew the damage had been done. As she walked back through the cool night toward Nathaniel's ranch, Norah's heart was heavy, but not broken. She'd fought through worse storms before. This time she wasn't alone, not with Emma and Nathaniel beside her. Still, The shadow of sabotage lingered, and Norah knew that the battle for Willow Creek's trust, and for her own redemption, was far from over. The tension in Willow Creek hung thick as summer humidity, every conversation prickling with suspicion. Norah tried to keep her head down, focusing on her work and the animals that needed her. But everywhere she went, she felt eyes on her, watching, waiting, judging. The little trust she'd gained from her work at Nathaniel's ranch seemed ready to collapse under the weight of new rumors. Still, Norah refused to give in. She poured all her energy into keeping Dusty and the sick horses alive, even as the shadows grew longer across the prairie, and the mood in town turned sharper, meaner. Nathaniel tried to shield her from the worst of it. He rode into town for supplies, answering questions with quiet dignity, and standing tall when others tried to push him. Emma stuck by Norah's side like a shadow, her fierce loyalty a balm against the cold glares of neighbors. Still, Norah felt the pressure mounting. She knew she had to prove her innocence, not just for her sake, but for Emma's, for Nathaniel's ranch, and for every animal still fighting the mysterious sickness. One morning, as dawn broke pink and gold over the horizon, Norah and Nathaniel sat on the porch, going over every detail of the last week: the sabotage, the poisoned water, the strange footprints, the scrap of coat. "There has to be something we're missing," Nathaniel muttered, frustration etched into every line of his face. "Someone's going out of their way to frame you, Norah. But why? What do they gain?" Norah thought back to her earliest days in Willow Creek, when she'd heard stories of rival ranches and old grudges. One name kept coming up: Silas Hart. He was a man who built his empire on intimidation, snapping up struggling land, squeezing out anyone who couldn't pay or who dared to stand up to him. Norah's brow furrowed. "Silas has always wanted your land, hasn't he?" Nathaniel nodded grimly. "He made an offer this spring. Said I'd be a fool to turn it down. When I refused, he started sending his boys to sniff around. Threats, missing tools, fence posts cut. But this is different. It's bigger. It's crueler." Norah's mind raced. "And what about the coat we found? That rough fabric? You said his ranch hands wear those for branding days." Nathaniel clenched his jaw. "Yeah, and I'd bet my best mare it belonged to one of Silas's men." Before they could puzzle further, Emma burst onto the porch, cheeks flushed, eyes wide. "Miss Norah! Nathaniel! I found something! You gotta see!" The three hurried down to the barn, where Emma led them to a corner behind the tack room. "Look, there's more footprints, and this." She pointed to a cluster of disturbed earth, where a small vial lay half-buried. Norah scooped it up, examining the residue inside. Pale, sour-smelling. Nothing like any medicine she'd brought from Boston. Nathaniel took the vial, sniffed, and scowled. Lye, or something close to it, that'd poison a whole trough in a heartbeat. Norah's pulse quickened. "It's the same stuff I smelled before." She looked at Nathaniel, hope stirring in her chest. "If we can prove this came from Silas's place, we can clear my name. But we need more. Something that can't be denied." Nathaniel's face darkened. "It won't be easy. Silas has half the town eating out of his hand. We'll need a witness, or at least someone who knows what's going on over there." Later that day, Emma played near the old mine on the property's edge, where Willow Creek's children sometimes snuck off to chase rabbits. She noticed a boy her age crouched by the fence, poking a stick into the dust. It was Jacob, a quiet stable boy who worked for Silas Hart, always keeping to himself. When he saw Emma, he nearly bolted, but she called out, "Wait, please! I won't tell. Did you see who came here last night?" Jacob hesitated, eyes darting, fear plain on his face. He glanced back toward Hart's property, then whispered, Silas's men. They came through the woods late, carrying bottles. Said they had to teach the city vet a lesson. Said nobody'd trust her if more animals got sick. Emma's heart hammered. Will you tell Sheriff Avery? We need you to. If you don't, they'll blame Miss Norah forever. Jacob shook his head, terror rising. If I talk, Silas'll run my family out. But he looked at Emma, then down at the dirt. I saw them pour the poison. I saw who it was. I'll talk to the sheriff, but you gotta promise he'll keep me safe. Emma promised with all her heart, and dashed back to the ranch to tell Norah and Nathaniel what she'd learned. Norah gripped Emma's shoulders, gratitude and relief mingling with worry. You did good, Emma. Now let's hope Jacob is brave enough to tell the truth in front of grown men who might want to see him silenced. That night, as the wind rattled the windows and shadows stretched across the fields, Norah and Nathaniel prepared for a confrontation. They wrote out everything they'd discovered: the poisoned trough, the cloth scrap, the footprints, the threats, the vial, and planned to meet the sheriff first thing in the morning. Before dawn, a heavy fist pounded on the door. Nathaniel opened it to find Silas Hart himself standing on the porch, flanked by two of his burliest ranch hands. Silas's eyes were cold, mouth twisted in a sneer. I hear you've been snooping where you don't belong, he drawled. This is your only warning. Pack up, leave town, and maybe the sickness stops. Norah stepped forward, heart thumping, meeting Silas's stare with steel in her eyes. I'm not leaving, Mr. Hart. I'm not afraid of you. Silas leaned in close, voice low and threatening. You should be. Outsiders don't last long in Willow Creek. Nathaniel moved to stand beside Norah, jaw set, fists clenched. You'll answer to the sheriff, Silas. We know what you've done. Silas let out a harsh laugh. You got no proof. Only a bunch of sick animals and a stranger's word. Nobody'll believe you. But as Silas and his men stalked away into the pre-dawn gloom, Norah felt a fierce determination settle inside her. He's desperate, she whispered to Nathaniel. That's why he's pushing so hard. He knows the truth is about to catch up. The three of them, Norah, Nathaniel, and brave little Emma, set off for town at sunrise, Jacob trailing nervously behind. They carried their evidence and their hope, ready to put everything on the line. The showdown was coming, and Willow Creek's future hung in the balance, not just for Norah and her friends, but for every soul, human and animal alike, who dared to believe that justice could still win against fear. And as the sky brightened over the prairie, Norah knew the fight wasn't just about proving her innocence. It was about making a stand, once and for all, against the darkness that had taken root in Willow Creek. If there was one thing Willow Creek had always feared, it was a mob. That fear came alive the moment Silas Hart's anger took to Main Street like a spark to dry grass. The town was raw from suspicion and weeks of sick animals, and Silas was shrewd enough to twist every fear in his favor. At dusk, he marched into the saloon, slapped a silver dollar on the bar, and started telling anyone who'd listen that Norah Montgomery, the strange Boston woman, was not just unlucky, but dangerous. By nightfall, the talk had grown teeth. Ranchers nursed bitter cups of coffee, voices rising in waves. She's the one bringing this plague, Silas shouted over the crowd. Nathaniel Reed's in on it too. While we suffer, they prosper. While our horses drop, their stables stand. Each word fanned the flames. Soon old grudges surfaced. Lost calves, water rights, an argument from 5 years back, all twisted to feed the fire. Some tried to speak for Norah, but Silas's men drowned them out with jeers. Back at the ranch, Norah finished washing out the last bandage and felt an uneasy stillness in the air. The night was too quiet. Even the crickets seemed to hush. Nathaniel stood at the window, his face bathed in lamplight, jaw tight. Emma curled in a chair nearby, clutching Lucky the foal's battered wooden toy. Every so often, the girl looked at Norah, worry flickering in her eyes. Then the dogs started barking, a wild, frantic chorus. Norah and Nathaniel raced to the porch just as a flicker of torchlight appeared on the horizon, followed by the murmur of angry voices. "Stay inside, Emma," Nathaniel ordered, grabbing his rifle. Norah's heart thudded against her ribs. The mob was coming, and she could smell their fury on the wind. Within minutes, the front yard filled with townsfolk, faces twisted by fear and the ugly glow of fire, hands clenched around sticks, axes, or nothing at all. Silas Hart stood at the front, his voice ringing out. "We warned you, Nathaniel! We warned you, Norah! Give up the city witch, or we'll take matters into our own hands!" Sheriff Avery arrived, trying to calm them. "This isn't justice! Stand down!" But the crowd surged, voices tangled with years of resentment and fear. Someone threw a rock. It shattered a window. Emma screamed. Nathaniel leveled his rifle, but Norah grabbed his arm. "Don't! If you shoot, they'll never listen." That's when a flaming torch arced through the night and crashed onto the barn's dry shingles. In seconds, fire licked at the roof, crackling as it raced along the boards. The mob froze for a heartbeat. Then chaos erupted. Horses in the barn shrieked. Dusty reared in his stall, kicking at the door. Smoke gushed out, thick and black. Norah pushed past the porch, voice hoarse. "The animals! We have to save them!" Nathaniel ran after her, hacking at the barn door with an axe. Emma darted out, dodging between adults' legs, determined to help despite the shouts to stay back. Inside, the heat was suffocating. Norah pulled her bandana over her mouth, eyes watering. She felt her way to Dusty's stall, unbolting the latch. The Mustang whinnied, muscles trembling, and Norah coaxed him forward. "Come on, boy, this way!" Behind her, Nathaniel led out the mares. Emma grabbed Lucky, the foal, her arms shaking but firm. A burning beam crashed near the door. Norah froze, chest tight. The path was blocked. But then, in a moment she'd never forget, Dusty nudged Emma and Lucky forward, guiding them through the narrow gap between flames and falling boards. Emma clung to the foal's mane, coughing, tears streaming down her cheeks. Norah saw them break into the open air and felt hope flare, even as her own strength flagged. Nathaniel's voice cut through the smoke. "Norah, over here!" She staggered toward him, gripping Dusty's reins. They tumbled out into the yard just as the barn roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. The mob fell silent, shock freezing them in place. Sheriff Avery fired his pistol into the air. "Enough! This ends now!" His eyes blazed as he pointed at Silas Hart. "You, drop that torch! And the rest of you, if you have a shred of decency left, help put out this fire!" A few townsfolk snapped out of their stupor. Mrs. Evers ran for a bucket, tears streaming down her cheeks. Old Mr. Jensen yanked a blanket from his wagon and beat at the flames. The tide turned, not with words, but with action. In the light of disaster, Willow Creek's true spirit flickered to life. People who'd hurled insults now hurled water. Men who'd doubted Norah formed a bucket line beside Nathaniel and the sheriff. Together they battled the blaze. Emma sobbed in Norah's arms, soot streaking her face, but her grip on Lucky never loosened. Dusty pressed close, shielding Emma and the foal from stray sparks. When at last the fire was out, only the blackened shell of the barn remained. Smoke curled into the stars. Norah stood with Nathaniel and Emma, all three trembling, exhausted, hearts pounding, but alive. Sheriff Avery addressed the crowd, his voice cold and heavy. This was no accident. There will be consequences for anyone who took part. I know the truth's coming. About the poison, the fires, all of it. He turned to Norah, voice softening. You saved more than just horses tonight. You saved this town from itself. Some folks still glared at Norah, fear and shame warring in their eyes. But others, a handful at first, then more, came forward to thank her, to apologize, to offer help. Mrs. Evers pressed a bundle of clean bandages into Norah's hands, whispering, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Even a few men who'd yelled loudest that evening joined the effort to herd the horses to safety and tend the wounded. As dawn bled into the sky, Norah collapsed on the porch steps, Emma and Nathaniel at her side. The ranch was battered but standing. The trust so hard won felt fragile, but this time it held. For the first time, Norah saw real change in the faces around her. Grief and loss, yes, but also gratitude and a new resolve. Dusty and Lucky stood quietly in the pasture, Emma curled up between them. Norah ran her hand over the Mustang's flank, whispering, You were the real hero tonight. Nathaniel sat beside her, the firelight dancing in his tired eyes. You gave them hope, Norah. You gave us all hope. And as the sun rose over Willow Creek, Norah knew the night's fire had burned away more than a barn. It had burned away some of the town's fear and suspicion, too, leaving behind the first fragile shoots of unity, a new chance for forgiveness and healing, if only they were brave enough to take it. The smell of burnt wood lingered for days, twisting through the prairie grass and clinging to every porch in Willow Creek. But even as the blackened remains of Nathaniel's barn stood as a reminder of all that had nearly been lost, something else started to spread across town, a quiet, determined sense of hope. The night of fire had shaken everyone, but in the cold light of morning, folks who had once looked at each other with suspicion began to see their neighbors anew. It started with small acts. Mrs. Evers, still racked with guilt, showed up at Nathaniel's gate with a basket of bread and a tin of homemade salve for the horses' burns. Old Mr. Jensen, whose voice had once been loudest against Norah, offered his wagon and time to help clear away the charred rubble. Even Sheriff Avery, his uniform smudged from smoke and sleepless nights, returned again and again, not just to check on the investigation, but to hammer nails, haul water, and share stories around Nathaniel's battered kitchen table. Norah felt the change most keenly in the eyes of the children. Where once they'd stared at her from behind their mother's skirts, now they watched with admiration as she mixed poultices, their hands eager to help. Emma was never far from her side, quick to carry a message or hold a trembling animal. The ranch itself became a hive of activity, neighbors pitching in to rebuild the barn, mend fences, and care for the remaining livestock. Nobody said it aloud, but it was clear. Willow Creek had decided to stand together, at least for now. Amidst this flurry, the truth about Silas Hart finally burst into the open. Sheriff Avery called a meeting in front of the saloon, townsfolk packing the dusty square, the air heavy with expectation. Norah, Nathaniel, and Emma stood near the front, Emma's hand tight in Norah's. Jacob, the shy stable boy, had summoned all his courage to testify about what he'd seen. His voice shook as he spoke of Silas's men sneaking onto Nathaniel's land, pouring poison in the trough, their words clear in the moonlight. The evidence Norah and Nathaniel had gathered, vial, cloth, footprints, was enough to make even the most skeptical townsfolk pause. Silas tried to bluster his way out, but the town had had enough. Sheriff Avery placed him under arrest on the spot, his allies falling silent as Silas spat and raged, dragged away in handcuffs. For a moment, a heavy silence hung in the air. Then, slowly, people began to clap, tentative at first, then growing in strength. Norah watched the crowd and saw relief blooming where there had been only anger and fear. As the days turned into a week, Norah became busier than ever. She moved from ranch to ranch, treating sick animals, teaching families how to prevent future outbreaks. Some of her remedies were simple: clean water, fresh bedding, patience, and gentleness. But her presence alone seemed to calm even the most stubborn beasts and people alike. Townsfolk brought her warm meals, patched her boots, and fixed up the tiny room above the bakery, offering her a permanent place in Willow Creek. For the first time in her wandering life, Norah felt wanted. One afternoon, as sunlight danced on new boards rising in place of the old barn, Sheriff Avery approached her with a wide smile. "Norah, the town council's made a decision. We want you to stay, officially, be our veterinarian. You've more than proved yourself." Norah's throat tightened, 1,000 doubts flickering through her mind. She'd run from Boston after being blamed for something she didn't do, convinced she'd never belong anywhere again. Now, with Emma tugging her hand and Nathaniel watching her with hope in his eyes, she realized she was more than the sum of her scars. She nodded, blinking back tears. "I'd be honored, Sheriff." That night, after supper, Emma found Norah sitting on the porch, gazing out at the prairie. The rebuilding had left everyone exhausted, but hope buzzed in the air, thick as fireflies. Emma climbed into Norah's lap, serious as a judge. "Miss Norah, can I ask you something?" she said, her voice small. "Anything," Norah replied, brushing a loose curl from Emma's cheek. Emma hesitated, then looked up. "I don't have anybody, really. Not since Ma died. I want you to be my family. Will you? Will you be my guardian? Please." For a moment, Norah felt the old fears rise. Fear of loving, of losing, of not being enough. But as she looked at Emma, she saw all the ways they'd already saved each other. She hugged the girl tight, her voice thick. "Yes, Emma. I would be honored, if you'll have me." Nathaniel, standing at the door, watched the scene with a quiet smile. He joined them on the porch, settling beside Norah, his arm brushing hers. The three of them sat together as the last of the sunlight faded, a new family forged not by blood, but by choice and hardship and hope. The next morning, Norah and Emma led Dusty and Lucky out to the rebuilt paddock, children from all over town trailing behind. Norah called for everyone's attention, her voice ringing clear and strong. "We've been through a hard time, all of us, but we've learned that healing comes from working together, from trusting one another, not from suspicion or fear." She demonstrated how to care for a sick horse, inviting children and parents to watch and ask questions. Emma proudly showed off her bandaging skills. By the time the sun set, there were smiles and laughter, hands clasped in new friendship. The memory of the fire hadn't faded, but something stronger had taken root. That night, Norah lay awake, listening to the gentle breath of Emma sleeping beside her, the rustle of horses in the new barn. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt completely at peace. She understood that family and home were not accidents of birth, but the result of courage. The courage to stay, to fight, to forgive, and to love. Outside, Willow Creek glowed with lamplight and promise. Norah knew there would still be hard days ahead. There always were. But now she faced them with family at her side and a town that, finally, had opened its arms. Willow Creek awoke to a new season. As summer gave way to early fall, the land blushed with gold and russet, and the air carried a sweet promise of harvest. The nightmares of fire, poison, and suspicion seemed distant now. the sharpest edges dulled by forgiveness, hard work, and time. Yet the lessons of those bitter weeks lingered everywhere, in the wary glances that slowly softened, in the hands that reached out instead of turning away, in the knowledge that unity required constant tending, like a fragile garden. Norah, Nathaniel, and Emma became the living symbol of this new spirit. The ranch, once a place of fear and ruin, blossomed again with life. Dusty and Lucky frisked in the pasture, manes tossed by the wind, and Molly, Emma's loyal pony, whickered at the fence, healthy at last. The new barn stood tall and proud, not just a building, but a monument to the town's shared effort and healing. On its doors, neighbors had carved their names and a simple phrase, "Together we rise." With the threat gone and the culprit behind bars, Norah threw herself into her work with renewed purpose. She walked fence lines with Nathaniel, taught Emma everything she knew about tending wounds and calming frightened animals. She mended broken harnesses and hearts in equal measure. But the work that meant most to her, and to Willow Creek, was what happened on one bright Saturday when she and Emma opened the ranch gates and invited everyone in. The open day began with nervous excitement. Word had spread that Miss Norah and Emma would be giving a demonstration about animal care. Folks who had once whispered rumors now showed up early, some carrying pies, others shyly clutching their hats. The children ran ahead, eager to see Dusty and Lucky, to pet Molly, to watch Norah at work. Norah welcomed everyone with a wide smile, her voice strong. "We've all been through a lot, but out of hardship comes knowledge, and out of fear can come kindness. Today, we're not just healing animals, we're learning to heal each other." She began by showing how to check a horse's eyes and gums for signs of illness. Emma, beaming with pride, demonstrated proper bandaging techniques on Lucky's leg. Laughter and applause rippled through the crowd as the foal pranced in his fresh wrappings, showing off for the children. Norah invited the townsfolk to ask questions, and soon she was surrounded by young and old, by ranchers and shopkeepers, all hungry to learn, all wanting to do better. A few of the older ranchers hung back, arms crossed, but even they listened, their skepticism slowly melting into curiosity. Sheriff Avery nodded in approval, adding a few words about the importance of looking out for one another, not just in times of trouble, but always. The most powerful moment came when Mrs. Evers, who had once shunned Norah, stepped forward, her eyes bright with tears. "I was wrong about you, Miss Montgomery. We all were. You showed us what it means to forgive and to fight for what's right." She offered Norah a loaf of her finest bread, a peace offering that Norah accepted with both hands. One by one, others followed. Old Mr. Jensen handed Norah a carving he'd made, a Mustang, wild and free. The baker brought pastries. The children drew pictures of Dusty, Lucky, and Emma, taping them to the new barn wall. By the time the afternoon sun slanted low, the ranch was filled with a sense of celebration that had nothing to do with the festival or the harvest. It was a celebration of survival, of trust rebuilt, and of the power of redemption. Nathaniel stood quietly at Norah's side, watching as people who had nearly driven them out now reached for friendship. He turned to her, gratitude softening his features. "You saved us, Norah. Not just the horses, or this ranch, but the whole town. You taught us how to forgive, how to look past our fear." Norah squeezed his hand, emotion thick in her throat. "We all saved each other, Nathaniel. You gave me a second chance, when no one else would. Emma gave me hope again. And Willow Creek, well, it taught me that sometimes you have to lose everything to find where you belong." As dusk settled in, Emma gathered the children by the pasture fence and led Dusty and Lucky out to greet them. The Mustang, once the cause of panic and anger, now moved with a calm pride, the foal frisking at his heels. The crowd fell silent, watching as Emma patted Dusty's neck and spoke. We were scared, but Miss Norah showed us that helping and trusting each other is the only way to get through hard times. Horses and people, we're not so different. We all need friends. Her words echoed in the quiet. Norah felt tears sting her eyes, not of pain, but of gratitude. The town that had once judged her, that had nearly driven her away, now stood together in a circle of support, sharing food, laughter, and the knowledge that they could weather any storm if they faced it as one. That night, the ranch was filled with music and voices as neighbors lingered, unwilling to let go of the joy they'd found. Norah sat on the porch, Emma nestled beside her, Nathaniel humming a tune under his breath. The lights from the house spilled across the grass, and in that golden glow, Norah understood that forgiveness was not a single act, but a lifelong practice, a choice to see the good, to let go of fear, to open your heart again and again. As the stars blinked awake over Willow Creek, Norah whispered a silent promise to her new family, to her friends, and to herself. She would never run from trouble again. She would stay, she would fight, and she would love, because now she knew that redemption was possible for anyone willing to reach for it. And in the hush of that perfect evening, Willow Creek, once a town divided by suspicion, became at last a true community, healed not just by medicine or miracles, but by courage, kindness, and the simple, stubborn power of forgiveness. The sun rose golden over Willow Creek, gilding the prairie grass and warming the rooftops of a town forever changed. Summer's end meant cool mornings and crisp air, the promise of a new beginning humming quietly beneath the surface of daily life. But for Norah Montgomery, Emma, Nathaniel, and everyone who'd found healing at the battered old ranch, this morning felt different, sweeter, fuller, as if hope had finally settled in for good. Norah stood on the porch with a steaming mug in her hands, watching Dusty and Lucky graze at the fence while Emma chased the foal across the dewy field, laughter echoing clear and bright. Nathaniel emerged from the barn, arms stretched to the sky, his face as peaceful as Norah had ever seen it. There was a gentleness to the land and the people that hadn't been there before, as if the tragedies of the summer had burned away all the old fear, leaving room for something truer to grow. Inside the house, the kitchen bustled with activity, fresh bread rising in the oven, eggs sizzling, the clatter of plates and laughter spilling into every corner. Mrs. Evers arrived early with cinnamon rolls, and Sheriff Avery came by on his way to town, tipping his hat to Norah and offering a shy smile. The morning felt like a celebration, though no one had called it one. As breakfast wrapped up, Norah called for everyone to gather outside. The sky was endless and blue, the kind of day that made the prairie seem full of possibility. People from all across Willow Creek made their way up the dusty road, some with baskets of food, others with their children or leading horses. Neighbors who had once eyed each other warily now stopped to shake hands and share news. Old resentments softened by months of hardship and forgiveness. Norah stood on the porch steps, hands clasped in front of her, and waited until the last of the children found their seats on the grass. She looked out at the faces before her, young and old, familiar and new, and felt a surge of gratitude so strong she had to blink back tears. When she spoke, her voice was steady, full of conviction and love. "Willow Creek," she began. "I came here a stranger. I'd lost my way in another life, back east, a life filled with closed doors and bitter words. I never thought I'd find a place where I belonged again. But all of you, even through our hardest days, have shown me that home isn't about where you're born or even what your name is. It's about the people and the animals you fight for. It's about the courage to forgive, the strength to stand up for what's right, and the hope that grows when we care for each other. The crowd was silent, listening. Emma squeezed Norah's hand and smiled up at her. Norah continued, her voice growing stronger. We've learned together that fear is powerful, but trust and kindness are even stronger. We've seen how quickly suspicion can divide us, but we've also seen how a single act of bravery or forgiveness can bring us back together. That's what I hope we never forget. She looked at the children, at Emma and her friends, at the parents and elders who had risked so much. Family isn't just blood. It's every person willing to help you through your darkest hour, every friend who stands up for you when it counts. That's what we've built here. Something worth holding on to. Something worth protecting. Emma stood, cheeks flushed with pride, announced, "Miss Norah's right. We all belong here. Even Lucky and Dusty, they're part of our family too." Laughter and applause rippled through the group. Sheriff Avery nodded, his gaze warm. We nearly lost ourselves to fear, but we found our way again, and I reckon it's because we finally learned to trust and to fight for each other. Mrs. Evers handed out her cinnamon rolls, smiling through happy tears. Nathaniel, who had always been a man of few words, cleared his throat and faced the crowd. "I spent a long time believing you could only count on yourself. I was wrong. Norah, Emma, you proved to me that second chances are real and that nobody has to face hard times alone. I hope Willow Creek never forgets that." The celebration continued well into the day. There were games for the children, music played on battered guitars, and horses adorned with bright ribbons. Emma led a parade of children on ponies, Dusty and Lucky at the front, their manes shining in the sun. Norah watched, her heart full, as townsfolk who had once been adversaries now danced and laughed together, a community reborn. As afternoon faded, Norah took Emma's hand and led her to a quiet spot overlooking the fields. Together they watched the horses graze and the town's children play, sunlight streaming through the trees. "Are you happy here?" Emma asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Norah nodded, emotion thick in her throat. "Happier than I ever thought possible. Because I chose to stay, because you and Nathaniel and everyone here gave me reasons to believe in home again." Emma smiled, snuggling close. "You're my family. I'm never letting you go." Norah kissed the top of her head, eyes shining. "I'm not going anywhere." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Norah gathered everyone for one final moment together. She spoke not as a stranger, but as someone who belonged, who had earned her place through hardship and kindness. "We're more than just neighbors now," she said, her voice echoing over the meadow. "We're a family, and I hope, when hard times come again, and they will, we remember what we did here. We stood together, we forgave, we trusted, and we built something stronger than any fire, any fear, any storm." The story of Willow Creek became legend in the years that followed. Children grew up listening to tales of Dusty, Lucky, and the outcast vet who helped heal an entire town. The scars of the past never truly vanished, but they became reminders of what courage, compassion, and forgiveness could do. And every year, on the anniversary of that final sunlit gathering, Norah, Emma, Nathaniel, and the people of Willow Creek would walk out together to the wide meadow, leading their children and their horses into the peace of the prairie, united, resilient, and home at last.